What did the Druids believe about reincarnation? We don't know much about the specifics about the belief of reincarnation. There isn't too much in the folklore or in the tales. But we do have some ancient sources that tell us a little bit. And the most important of those is the Pharsalia, or the Di Bello Ciwili, from Lucan, written about 61 BC. But he also mentions in this poem a little bit about the belief in reincarnation. He says, "Druids, when the war was done, to mysteries strange and hateful rites returned. To you alone 'tis given the gods and stars to know or not to know. Secluded groves your dwelling places and forests far removed. If what ye sing be true, the shades of men seek not the dismal homes of Erebus or death's pale kingdoms, but the breath of life still rules these bodies in another age. Life on this hand and that, and death between. Happy the peoples beneath the northern star, in this their false belief. For them no fear of that which frights all others. They, with hands and hearts undaunted, rush upon the foe, and scorn to spare the life that shall return." So it seems pretty clear that this is speaking of reincarnation, of course, but the exact process is unclear. Life on this hand and on that. Life still rules these bodies in another age, right? So what is the time length between the process of reincarnation? How long does the spirit of the dead reside within death? Because he also seems to imply that the spirit seeks not death's pale kingdoms, but how then, what happens upon death? Well, it so happens that there is a medieval Irish translation of the Pharsalia that gives us a little bit of a clue, perhaps. And here is what it has to say. "Came there the people of the Druids, that people whom science and soothsaying used to serve to find out the future. From the courses of stars and constellations, this is what they would say through their diabolic science, that souls of those that died in this northern temperate zone were taken southward through the torrid zone and placed in other bodies in the southern temperate zone. Druids, the names of those folk." Now, this seems to be a very specific belief that the soul actually transits to another part of the world to be reborn. But we might wonder if, because this is a medieval interpretation of a Druidic belief, and it seems like they're trying to ascribe this to a physical location based on their understanding of geography at that time. So rather than a physical transition, what it might be talking about is that when you die in this world, you are born again in the other world, which is simply a place sort of like this world, but different. You could think of it almost as another kind of dimension. And it seems to be that that's what they're talking about. And in Irish myth, of course, you see that there is this kind of existence in the other world, where forces are doing battle in the other world, and where sometimes hero figures like Cuchulainn and others will be asked to participate in these otherworld battles and will be assisted to go there and to fight on behalf of some underworld king. And so, though expressed here as a physical location, as in the southern hemisphere of the world, as opposed to the northern hemisphere, I think really probably in origin, this is referring to not a physical location necessarily, but is trying to use this as a distinction between this world and the other world. Now, we do have another bit of info that seems to also hint towards this kind of conception, but also gives us a slightly different look at this, which is that there is a different angle, that they didn't only believe in reincarnation. There is also other processes taking place. and that the ideal situation was not perhaps reincarnation. Donn was a god of the dead, essentially. He seems to have played a role similar perhaps to Yama. And I'll read out a section of Teach Duinn from the Lore of Places. "Let his body be carried to yonder high rock," says Amergin. "His folk shall come to this spot. So hence it is called Teach Duinn. And for this cause, according to the heathen, the soul of sinners visits Teach Duinn before they go to hell, and give their blessing, ere they go, to the soul of Donn. But as for the righteous soul of a penitent, it beholds the place from afar, and is not borne astray. Such, at least, is the belief of the heathen, hence Teach Duinn is so called." Now, people have read this in various ways. They have tried to say that this juxtaposes the Christian belief to the pagan belief. That when he says that, "But as for the righteous soul of a penitent, it beholds the place from afar, and is not borne astray," this is taken to mean that the souls of Christians are not brought here. They are able to resist this draw of this place. But to me, this is less clear, because right after it says, "Such, at least, is the belief of the heathen." In other words, it does seem to be saying that the heathen believed two different things. Perhaps we shouldn't say the souls of sinners visit Teach Duinn before they go to hell. This is a Christian interpretation of a pagan understanding of this. Because it's a Christian interpreting this, he's sort of contrasting it to his idea of heaven and hell. Now we know, for instance, that as early as the Rig Veda, there were conceptions of this kind of process. Now, for instance, there is Svarga, and Svarga has various different realms within it, and Indra was its lord. But this place was not a place that everyone could get into. It was for very adept sages. Now, Svarga, or Svargaloka, is a place that is accessed by the righteous between incarnations in the mortal world. So you have the same idea conveyed by Lucan, life on one hand, life on the other, death in between. But there is this in between where you go somewhere, and it does seem that contained within the Irish sources there was an idea that you would go different places during this time depending on what kind of character or what kind of life you led. Now, the ultimate aim, of course, is not rebirth at all. It is moksha. That is, you are elevating yourself above the cycle of death and rebirth. But that is something that is very, very difficult to obtain. Donn seems to be the first person to die, and this corresponds also to deities like Yama or Yima, and some people have noted that it's possible that Donn might be understood as Dagda, because Dagda is sometimes called Dagda Donn, and sometimes that's translated as swarthy, but it can also mean simply dark or brown. And Dagda is likewise associated with the cycle of death and rebirth, and associated with the earth as well. The Dagda is also linked to fire. Sometimes he's called Aed. And this is likewise with Yama, whose son is said to be the Hindu god of fire, Agni. So there is this very strong relationship to these figures and gods of fire. And sometimes Aed is said to be the Dagda's son, and sometimes the Dagda is called Aed. And the link between fire and the dead might relate to the fire's destructive power, how the fire is a messenger of the gods, but also, of course, a practice of cremation. And we know that, Proto-Celts, like the Urnfield Celts, for instance, well, they're called Urnfield because they cremated the dead and buried them in urns. Now, I'm not saying this is an ironclad theory, but there does seem to be a connection there, and many people recognize that the figure of Ead in Irish myth seems to be an underworld figure. So to recap, our sources provide us with a little bit of detail that we can perhaps flesh out using other Indo-European sources. And it seems that there was a process of reincarnation, but that process wasn't necessarily the same for everyone. Depending on the type of person you were, the life that you led, you could potentially have a better time of this reincarnation or a better stay during your intermittent period between being reincarnated. That perhaps you were reincarnated into this otherworld realm that was not so much the same realm as the shades of the dead as perceived in later Greek myth, but was really an alternative reality or a kind of other dimension where you carried on the same kind of life that you have in this world, but simply in some other location that coexists with our own location, but that we see people able to cross the boundaries of in various mythical tales. Anyhow, if you found this video interesting, please like, subscribe, share, and please consider supporting me on Patreon. Grove Mila Magat, sh agus Marigoni, Shas Gohar.